So today I wanted to talk about making cut lists from working drawings. And what I've done is I'm going to share one of the drawings that are in your lecture. This is a Broadway or theater flat, and this is a three-dimensional picture here. Remember, when we are making flats, you're gonna have different parts to these flats. So I have a rail, which goes the entire width of the flat. We have stiles, that's the height of the flat. And then we have toggles that help keep the frame to the correct size. And if you see over here, this is a 4-foot by 8-foot Broadway flat, also called a theater flat. So if I wanted to make a cut list from this particular flat, you can see here's a 2-dimensional image. And in this 2-dimensional image, you can see it's 4 foot in width. Right here, it's telling you 4 foot. And it's overall dimension 8 feet in height. Remember, our rails are always the exact dimension, because if we have to move these flats and it's moved across the floor, this will help protect it from hitting anything on the floor and jamming and knocking it out of being square. Now, going back to that 3-dimensional image, okay, we would build these flats out of 1x3 pine. Number 2 is the grade. And the actual dimensions of that 1x3 are going to be 3/4 of an inch in thickness and 2.5 inches on that face, on the width. Theater flats are built on their face, and then when we get to the Hollywood flat, they're built on their edge. So we're talking about building it on its face here.
Chris, can I ask a question?
Yes.
The pine number 2, is that industry standard, or is that like just what we use?
It's industry standard. When you go to the lumberyard and pick up 1x, it's most likely going to be number 2, unless you go to the specialty area where you can buy like oak or mahogany. Those would be a higher grade, but they're also a different type of wood. What we're using is pine number 2, and it's usually yellow pine or white pine. Any other questions? Okay, well, I'll continue. So 1x3 pine number 2 is the standard that we would buy off the shelf. We order it from a lumber yard and not from Home Depot or Lowe's. We tend to get a better quality by ordering from a local lumber yard. And again, the dimensions are 3/4 of an inch thickness by 2.5 inches on its face. And that 2.5 inches is going to be important when we're trying to make our cut lists. Because if we come down here to make a rail, now our flat overall dimension is 4 feet. So our rail is going to be a 1x3 that is 4 feet 0 inches in length. So that's the actual dimension. We're going to have to do math if they only give us the overall dimensions to figure out what our stile lengths are going to be and what our toggles are going to be. So if that overall height of our theater flat is 8 feet, ouch, 8 feet, we gotta take away the dimension of the 1x3s that are on each side of the rail. So the rail on the bottom and the rail on the top, we're gonna have to take away the measurement of the face in order to get that dimension of the stile. So if each rail is 2.5 inches on its face. That means I'm gonna have to minus that from the style. Can you guys tell me what that measurement is? 2 rails width?
Five.
Chris, I'm not gonna lie, you kind of lost me. Like I'm a little bit confused.
Okay, that's fine. We'll cut. So
Don't you have to
you
take
can see
away
my
both
cursor.
2.5?
Say that again, though? Or who said that?
That was me. Don't you have to take away both 2.5? So it's 5.
So yeah, the overall would be a 5 inches subtracted from that overall length, which is 8 feet. You guys can see my cursor, right? You're not just seeing the pop-up of the letter
Yeah,
box.
we see your cursor.
Yeah, we see it.
So here on my cursor, Shadia, you see the rail? So this face right here of the rail is 2.5 inches. But this whole length from the bottom of the flat all the way to the top of the flat is 8 feet. So if I have to take away 2.5 inches at the bottom, following my cursor, and then up here at the top, 2.5 inches at the top, like Dayron said, and now I have to subtract 5 inches away from that overall top to bottom height of 8 feet. So what that's gonna give me is, that style is gonna be 7 foot, 7 inches in length, because there's 12 inches in a foot. So 5 minus 12 is gonna give me 7 inches. That's why I'm getting 7'7" for this style. Now, when we build a flat that's taller than 2 feet, we're gonna have to insert a toggle at that every 2 foot mark until we reach the overall 8 foot. So that means I'm gonna have 3 toggles on this particular theater flat because it's 8 feet tall. Every 2 feet, I'll place a toggle, one of these toggles. So if my overall width of the flat is still 4 feet in width, these toggles are inserted inside of these 2 stiles on either side. So I'm doing the same math. So if each stile has a 2.5 inch face here on either side, that's 5 inches again that I have to subtract from my overall width. So what's 5 inches minus taken out of 4 foot?
3 feet 7 inches.
Yes. So you're right. That's going to be 3 foot 7 inches for each of my toggles here. Now, what I also have to add on a theater flat are my supports. So that's going to be these 4 corner blocks, 2, 3, 4 corner blocks. And then I have these keystones that are holding my toggles in place. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 toggles. My toggles are going to be 2 inches in width by 4 inches wide, but they're made out of either 1/4 inch plywood or 1/4 inch Luan. My corner blocks are also made out of that Luan or 1/4 inch plywood. And these can be made either 8 inches on the angled side or 9 inches on the angled side. This document's going to tell you they're 9 inches that we cut on that 45-degree angle for your triangle. And do you guys remember from Stagecraft, which way does the grain face when we're putting it on a joint?
It's opposite, right?
Yes, opposite of that joint. So you want to make sure those are opposite. So if I go to the two-dimensional figure here, you can see these overall dimensions. So it's 4 foot in width, 8 feet in height, and here's my 7'7" measurement for the style, and my 3'7" dimension for a toggle. Okay. You guys following along with that so far? Some of you may be thinking, what happened? Okay, well, this recording should be sent to you after class 2. You can watch it again. But that was a theater flat. Now, I'm gonna go back into the screen share and show you the Hollywood flats, because those are the ones we're most likely gonna build here. It's what you guys have been building when we're doing construction for production. Okay, so here's a Hollywood flat. Same dimensions as the theater flat. It's going to be an overall 4 foot wide by 8 foot tall. But instead of building it on its face, we'll be building it on its edge. And just to remind you, a 1x3 has a 3/4 of an inch on its edge, on the thickness, and it still has 2.5 inches on its face. So instead of working with the dimensions of 2.5, now we're working with the dimension of 3/4 of an inch when we have to subtract out the measurement of our style and toggle. So our rails are still going to be the actual dimension, which is 4 foot, 0 inches in that length of that cut. But now our stiles are going to be minus the dimension of 3/4 of an inch on a rail on the bottom and 3/4 of an inch of a rail on the top. So 3/4 of an inch and 3/4 of an inch. Anyone want to throw out that answer?
1.5.
Yes. All right, Dayron. Okay. So we're taking 1.5 inches away from that overall height of 8 feet. So that's going to give me that dimension of 7 foot, 10.5. So if my toggles are that 1.5 inches shorter than the width of the entire flat of 4 foot, so these toggles here, what would that dimension end up being? I know someone can come up with those math problem. 1.5 inches minus 4 feet.
310.5.
310.5. Okay. Thank you. So our toggles are 3 toggles because it's the same principle as the theater flat. Every 2 feet we'll need that toggle support. So 3 foot 10.5 in length. So those would be a standard 4 foot by 8 foot flat. What if we had odd dimensions? So if we had odd dimensions happening, say we're building these Hollywood flats. So these Hollywood flats are different dimensions than a standard 4 foot by 8 foot sheet of Luan. So now we'd have to actually figure out the different dimensions and cut that piece of Luan to size to fit these particular flats. So these Hollywood flats, I have a 2 foot dimension for width and an 8 foot dimension for height. Again, our 1x3 pine number 2 is 3/4 of an inch thick, actual dimensions, by 2.5 inches on its face. So my rails on the top and the bottom, again, would be the actual dimension, 2 feet, 0 inches. Can you tell me the height of these stiles on either side? Remember, it's 3/4 of an inch thick on each rail, on the top and the bottom. So we're gonna have to use our brains here to figure out what these dimensions are if I'm only given the 2 overall dimensions of 2 foot width by 8 foot in height. Come on, guys, you can throw something out there. Give me a dimension. What's the height of this style?
8.
Well, 8 foot is the overall dimension. Remember, we have to take out the thickness of the rail on the bottom and the rail on the top. And they're 3/4 of an inch each.
So it would be 8 minus 6.5.
It would be 8 minus the 3/4 of an inch on the top rail and 3/4 of an inch on the bottom. So remember, 3/4 of an inch plus 3/4 of an inch is 1.5 inches.
Oh,
So 6.5 would be the number.
Okay, take your time. So 8 foot minus 1.5 inches.
So 7 and 10.5.
Yes, Shadia. 7, 10.5. I just want to make sure that I'm not clear on how you jumped to 6.
honestly, I added 3 1/4 and 3 1/4, and I don't think I know how to add fractions.
Okay.
She thought
So,
you were saying 3.
It's like taking, think of it this way, if this helps, if you had change in your pocket, if I had 3/4, so 3/4, 3/4 is 3/4. So that's 75 cents plus 75
Oh.
cents.
Okay, I see where I went wrong. I was thinking 3 1/4. I don't know
Right.
why.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can think of it, yeah, in quarters. So if I had 3/4 plus another 3/4, that would give me $1.50. So that's an inch
Okay.
and a half. If that
Makes
helps.
sense.
So that means, yes, these would be 7 foot 10.5. And then my toggles would also have to minus that overall dimension of 1.5 inches because I have the stiles on either side with the toggles fitting within, because I have to keep that 2 foot dimension. So that would give my cut list, if I'm writing out a cut list, see on the side, I would need 2 pieces at 2 foot, 2 pieces at 7 foot 10.5, and 3 toggles at 1 foot 10.5. So I could count out, yes, I need 1 rail at the top, 1 rail at the bottom. So that's 2. I need 1 stile on each side, that's 2. And then 1, 2, 3 pieces all the same, again, over here on the cut list. So I'll have 2 rails at 2 foot, 2 stiles at 7 foot 10.5, and 3 toggles at 1 foot 10.5. Okay. Hopefully you're following. Now, here I'm going to throw you for a loop. So say I'm building maybe a miniature fireplace here. So now I have some extra pieces than I would on a standard flat. But if I only give you these dimensions, the height is 4 foot. The width of the entire fireplace is 4 foot. Then I have either side of the fireplace at 1 foot. So that would mean the same on this side. That would make that 1 foot. And then I have an interior height of the actual place where the fireplace would be is 2 feet in height. Now I should be able to figure out all of my dimensions by just those 4 measurements. So the way I would go about it is I would start with the easy one first. So right here, if I look at the dimension and I actually look at the drawing, here, I'm gonna make it bigger. So this dimension is exactly 1 foot. So I can say that, okay, I have 1, 2 at the same width at 1 foot. So I can start making my cut list over here on the side. So I have 2 at 1 foot, 0 inch. And then again at the top, this is another rail. So it'd have the same terminology as that 4x8. So this rail goes the exact width at 4 foot. So I only have 1 piece at this width because these are toggles inside. So I only have 1 at 4 foot. So that 1 at 4 foot, 0 inches would be one of the pieces I would cut. Now these stiles here on left and right are going to be smaller, again, of that overall 4-foot dimension. Because remember, I have a rail at the top and a rail at the bottom, which are 3/4 of an inch thick on each one. So can you guys tell me what's that dimension interior of that for each style? The one on the left and the one on the right?
3 feet, 10.5 inches.
Yes.
Thank
Good
you, Sean.
job, Sean. So now I still have 2 more dimensions to figure out. I have this toggle and the second toggle of this fireplace. So these dimensions, again, are going to be shorter than that overall width of the 4-foot of the entire piece of that fireplace. So what would this toggle be if I had to subtract the style here on the left and the style on the right?
3, 10.5.
Yes, 3, 10.5. Good job, Genesis. And then I have the 2 heights here of my fireplace. Now notice the dimension here goes from the bottom of the fireplace to the opening of the fireplace. So that's 2 feet. So that means I only have to subtract the dimension here of this rail on the bottom. And what's the thickness of this rail?
Quarter. 3/4, sorry.
3/4 of an inch. So what would the height of these 2 pieces be of my frame?
111 1/4.
Okay.
Yes, Genesis. So I still have these 2 pieces, 1 foot 11 1/4. So if I check my math over here, because I've got the cut list out, so this cut list is wrong. So I would have to change the height of those last pieces to 1 foot 11 1/4 inch. So I'd have the one piece that's 4 foot at the top of the fireplace. I'd have on the next line on my cut list, I have 2 at 1 foot, 0 inches in length. Then I have the 2 toggles at 3 foot 10.5. The 2 stiles at 3 foot 10.5. And then I have the 2 pieces that would do the height of the actual fireplace at 1 foot 11 1/4. Okay. Cut list out. So we're using the paper and pencil as well to write down everything. We're working it out on the paper. So that's what you'll end up doing for your quiz. Okay, now I've given you these paper scales. I recommend you going out and buying your own scale ruler. But these paper scales are in the materials that you guys went ahead and picked up. The scale we're going to be working in today when you look at these sheets of paper is going to be 1 inch scale. So on your scale ruler, you'll find a dimension that says 1 inch. So that's going to mean 1 inch. For every 1 inch, it's going to equal 1 foot in the real world. Many of the working drawings you guys will come across are going to be either in 1/2 inch scale. I can't find that on the camera. So 1/2 inch scale, which is going to be marked on your paper, or 1/4 inch scale. So you'll find that portion of your scale ruler to use to make all the dimensions if you can't figure it out from what's given to you on the working drawing. Okay, so let's try this. Can you guys see this drawing?
Yes.
Yes.
So this is the 4x8 Hollywood flat. And we're going to be working in 1 inch scale. So I'm going to find on my scale ruler where it says 1 foot. So that's going to be where 1 foot equals, 1 inch equals 1 foot in the real world. So I can use my scale on this drawing to figure out my overall dimensions. Because this is a limited scale, I can do 4 feet at a time. So I know that's a 4-foot mark. And then from that end to the end of this flat, there's 2 4-foot marks. So this 8 foot is correct on the paper compared to my scale ruler. And then I can measure the width. I mark from 0 to the 4-foot mark. And yes, this is 4 foot, 0 inches. So this has been printed out in actual size. So if I needed to find a dimension, I could find an interior dimension. Remember, the toggles are shorter than the overall length, that width or length. So this toggle, if I wanted to measure the toggle, I'm still on the 1 inch scale mark. I'm going to start at the 3 foot here because I know it's smaller than 4 foot. So I'll put my mark at the end of the toggle on the 3 foot mark. And I would go backwards. And behind the 0, you'll see all these marks behind the 0. Those are going to be marking out inches. So I can count out inches behind the 0 mark and figure out what that dimension would be. So the closest mark is a 9. I can count to 10 and 10 and a half. So it would be a 3 foot, 10 and 1/2 mark. If I didn't have that dimension already marked on my drawing, I could use that scale ruler to help me figure out what the length of that 1x3 is so I can make my cut list off on the side. Now, if I move this slide, now I have my 4x8 Broadway or theater flat here. I can check to make sure the dimensions are correct as marked on the paper with my scale ruler. So I'm still in the 1 inch scale. So from 0 to the other edge is 4. So this is also printed in actual size. So if I had odd dimensions, say like that fireplace frame I needed to build, I could use my scale ruler to help me figure out the cut list for all those pieces and parts for that cut list. You'll need to watch that video on how to read your scale. We're going to be using these scales next week as well, because this is cut list. Next class, we're going to be reading light plots, and you'll need the scale to figure out placement of fixtures on these light plots. Any questions? No? Okay.